Now you're listening to Fantastic Formosa with John Abrams in Taipei. All right, welcome back to Fantastic Formosa. This is John Abrams, and we have a great guest back from his trip from Washington, D.C. to talk about, Ross Feingold. He is a lawyer here in Taiwan and has been here for nearly forever in Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And he discusses all kinds of things related to politics and legal issues here in Taiwan. He's on numerous programs here on TV and radio. And he also does Hong Kong TV as well, news programs. Ross Feingold, thank you for coming back.
Glad to be back, John.
Ross, you just came back from Washington, D.C. You're the director of a very interesting NGO based out of Paris, France. Can you tell us the name of the organization?
Sure. The name of the organization is the Association of American Residents Overseas.
Okay.
And I'm one of the directors on the board of directors. I have been for about 10 years.
How many people are in this organization?
Well, our membership is modest compared to the global overseas American population. So I think a better question, actually, is not how many dues-paying members we have, but a better question would be how many American expatriates are there around the world?
Wow. Yeah. I mean...
would you like to take a guess, John?
Millions, of course.
Yeah, you want to take a closer guess?
I don't know how many. The problem is that so many people have dual passports now, and so if you're a Taiwan citizen with a Canadian or American passport, does that make you a citizen in the other country? Do you count that person as an expatriate?
I would still count them. Yes.
All right. As dues payers, maybe.
So would you like to take a more precise guess?
Wow. See, I don't think it's fair to use both passports. It has to be singular expatriate, no other passport.
The United States allows dual citizenship, which most countries do, but there's a large number of countries that do not allow for dual citizenship. But the United States does. So to answer the question about how many expatriates there are, actually our organization, the Association of American Residents Overseas, or as we call it, AARO, or simply ARROW, we recently did an exercise to look at some of the data, and we talked to some experts as well. And we estimate that there's 5.4 million expatriates, so 5.4 million American citizens who live overseas. Let me explain what I mean when I say live overseas and what that number represents. We believe that there are 5.4 million Americans who actually live overseas. So that number excludes travelers. That excludes business travelers. It excludes tourists, people traveling outside the United States for a few weeks for leisure travel. It excludes students who are just going abroad for a semester. But for people like you or myself, John, who actually have made their lives overseas at the moment, we estimate that there's 5.4 million of those overseas Americans. And our group represents the interests of these 5.4 million overseas Americans. And we do advocacy with the United States Congress and with the federal government on behalf of the overseas community.
Now, how many Americans are living full-time in Taiwan?
Well, you'd have to ask the American Institute in Taiwan for that. Or you could also look at the National Immigration Agency here, which does publish data about how many people hold what we call in Taiwan Alien Residence Certificates, or ARCs. So they do publish that data. It's surprisingly low. Last time I looked, it was around 10,000 ARC holders from the United States. But again, as you pointed out, there are a lot of dual citizens. So there are a lot of people who hold U.S. passports and hold Taiwan passports, and they may have entered Taiwan using their Taiwan passport, not their United States passport. So they're living here as Taiwan citizens, not as American citizens. So if the National Immigration Agency says there's 10,000 Americans who literally live in Taiwan, the number is substantially higher when you include the dual passport holders. And that would be the same situation in a number of countries in this part of the world. Korea, for example, that's another country where there are a lot of dual nationals. Hong Kong is another jurisdiction with a lot of dual nationals. China, of course, would have a lot of dual nationals, even though they don't allow dual citizenship in China. But we know for a fact that there are a lot of dual citizens. But if you want me to tell you what the true number of overseas Americans are who live in Taiwan, I couldn't tell you, again, because there's so many U.S. citizens who enter Taiwan with their Taiwan passport. So then it just becomes guesswork.
Right. Well, the 10,000 number sounds about right, I think. I think there were probably more 20 years ago when I first got here.
Well, if you go back 20, 30, 40 years ago when there was a lot more manufacturing in Taiwan, when companies like RCA made televisions in Taiwan.
Right.
They probably had a whole bunch of expatriates to run the facility. They had a big boss, and they probably had finance people, engineers, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of multinational companies over the years, they've localized their staff in Taiwan because Taiwan has developed a sufficient pool of talent that you don't need to dispatch somebody from headquarters in the United States to run a business in Taiwan. There are more than enough qualified Taiwanese to run those businesses. So for multinational companies, not just American companies, but companies from other countries as well, for example, from Europe, whereas 30 years ago, they may have needed more expatriates. Today, they have less expatriates running their business operations in Taiwan.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Particularly when you look at something like the American Club, that seemed to be largely American citizens.
Well, John, I don't hang out at the American Club. Apparently, you do. They must be paying you really well here.
Yeah, they do pay me. No, they don't pay me enough to be a member, but I am allowed to go in with a club member, signed in, of course, and monitored at all times.
As you should be, John. In some ways, you're just like a little boy. You need to be monitored, not to play with other people's toys.
Yes,
So let me be a little bit more specific, if I may, John, about what we do at the Association of American Resident Overseas.
Wait a minute. Do you have a website?
Yeah, we do. It's www.aaro.org.
Okay.
Yeah, and welcome people to go visit our website and see all the information we have about issues that are important to overseas Americans. The issues that we look at as an organization are things that come out of the federal government, United States federal government laws and regulations that have an effect on overseas Americans. So we don't look at issues that come out of the governments where Americans live. So if for example, the Taiwan government passed a law to make it more difficult for Americans to live here, that's not the kind of issue we would look at as an organization. We only look at stuff that comes out of the Congress, laws that Congress passes and the president signs into law, or regulations that come from federal agencies, such as the IRS within the Department of the Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service. So we are focused on U.S. government laws and regulations that have a negative impact on overseas Americans. And believe me, there are lots and lots of things that come out of the federal government that have a negative effect on expatriates, which I could talk in more detail about.
Right. I've noticed that all kinds of laws regarding taxes and even the security laws that they've passed in the U.S. over 9/11 have gotten our attention as well. So you're one of the directors.
That's right.
All right, and you just came back from Washington, as I understand it.
That's right. So every year, our organization has what we call Overseas Americans Week, when we go to visit members of Congress and federal government agencies like the Department of State or the Internal Revenue Service. And we talk about issues that come from the federal government that frankly make life difficult for overseas Americans. And again, there are a number of issues which I could talk about in more detail. So we break out into groups. The delegation breaks out into groups, and we visit members of Congress, both in the House as well as the Senate. We visited over 60 members of Congress a couple of weeks ago when we were in Washington for Overseas Americans Week. And we tell them we met with staff. We met with Republicans as well as Democrats because the Association of American Residents Overseas is a strictly nonpartisan organization. So we met with Republican as well as Democrat staffers, and we walked them through some of these issues that make life difficult for overseas Americans.
So how long were you there in D.C.?
We were there for a week. That's why we call it Overseas Americans Week, John.
Well, of course. But I've been to D.C. quite a bit, and I can tell you a week in D.C. is getting up at 5 and getting home at 4 a.m.
Well, we didn't really have many nighttime activities. We didn't have nocturnal activities there, John. But visiting members of Congress all day long, it could be an exhausting exercise because you have to walk back and forth in the office buildings where the members of Congress have their offices.
Right.
There's 3 office buildings on the House side, and there are 3 office buildings on the Senate side. And you got to walk back. Fortunately, there's underground passages. You don't have to go outside.
Right.
So there are underground passages that connect the office buildings. But you're basically going back and forth like a ping pong ball. Running through the hallways trying to get to the next meeting. And we have meetings literally every half hour because the staffers, they just want to get a bit of a briefing on what the issues are. They're not looking to have very long meetings, keeping in mind that House and Senate staff who advise their boss, who is a member of Congress, they're bombarded with all sorts of issues from different interest groups. They could be national issues, or it could be a lot of issues related to the district or the state, if a district, if it's a House member, or a state, if it's a Senate member. So there are a lot of, we go into the office and we're waiting in the office greeting area, the lobby, and there's going to be 2 or 3 other delegations sitting there too, and they're trying to meet with the staff to complain about some issue or request a law get changed or a new law gets written. People from America who are listening to this show, they might remember the old Saturday morning ABC cartoon about how does a bill become a law.
Yes.
I'm only a bill, just a bill waiting on Capitol Hill.
Right.
And that's basically what we're doing. And that cartoon showed how people who are interested in writing a new law, they go and meet their member of Congress and explain what they want changed. And that's what we were doing.
Can be very frustrating, if I recall.
Especially for overseas Americans because we don't have a member of Congress, right? They're unlike some other countries that have members of parliament who specifically represent the overseas constituency. We don't have that in the United States. We don't do that. So the members of Congress, they represent either a district within a state, or in the case of senators, they represent a state. And also, as a population, over the 5.4 million overseas Americans that I referred to, we come from all over the country. We're not 2 million people from New York or 2 million people from Texas or California. We literally come from all 50 states. So even though we might vote by absentee ballot, we're dispersed. So we don't have that much influence over a member of the House or a member of the Senate as far as what our electoral impact might be, because we come from all over the country. That being said, 5.4 million people as a population, believe it or not, John, that would actually be in the top half of the U.S. states. So about 25 states have smaller populations than the overseas American population, yet we're not represented in Congress.
Yeah, but our needs are many. It's hard to, and it would be hard to narrow down, I think, one particular topic that we could all share.
Well, I could go through some of the issues of concern to overseas Americans if you'd like me to.
Well, let's focus on Taiwan for a minute. What is the average demand or frustration for an American living in Taiwan?
Well, actually, again, because we focus on issues that come from the federal government, the issues that we focus on have an effect on expatriates regardless of where they live. We're not focused on country-specific issues.
All right.
Because we don't look at issues that come from the governments of where we live.
Okay.
I hope that's clear to listeners.
What would be the number one overall?
Number one issue for overseas Americans at the moment is the inability to access financial services. And there's two parts to this issue. The first part of the issue is for people who live outside the United States, if they try to access financial services in Taiwan or in the United Kingdom or in South Africa or Canada or Mexico, most financial institutions don't want to provide financial services beyond a simple bank account to American citizens. And the reason for this is about 10 years ago, the United States passed a law. It's called FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, FATCA. And FATCA requires both the individual taxpayer, you or me, John, to report their overseas accounts to the United States government. And it also requires the foreign financial institution to report the bank account or the financial services account of the overseas American to the United States. So there's two reporting obligations. There's the reporting obligation of the individual overseas American, and there's the reporting obligation of the financial institution that provides any kinds of services to an American individual overseas. So most financial institutions overseas, they realize that if we don't provide financial services to American citizens in Taipei, in London, in Singapore, in Johannesburg, or in Ottawa, then we don't have to report anything to the U.S. government. So they made the decision that it's a lot easier not to have U.S. citizens as customers. So if you're an American citizen living in Taipei or London, you're not going to be able to open a mutual fund account. You're not going to be able to open a stock trading account anywhere in the world because the financial institutions, if they open this account for you, they will have to report it to the United States government. That's the law of the United States, and most financial institutions, for a variety of reasons, they have to comply with it. But somebody says, oh, well, Ross, that's an American law. Why does a bank in Taiwan have to comply with that? Well, there's an answer to that, John. The answer to that is after the United States passed this law, the United States government then went around the world and asked regulators in different countries all over the world to sign an agreement that those governments would require their financial institutions to provide this information to the United States government. So by this point in time, most governments around the world, they've signed an agreement with the United States government that they will provide, their institutions, their financial institutions, will provide to the United States government information about American citizens who have accounts at those institutions. So at this point, if you do have an account with a financial institution around the world, they are reporting that to the United States government every year. They're reporting how much money is in the account. So the easier thing for for those foreign financial institutions to do is simply not have United States citizens as customers. So that's the situation we're in right now. Because of this American law, most financial institutions outside the United States, they will not open accounts for American citizens. Now, if you're an American citizen who's made your life in Taiwan or in Paris and you've lived there for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, at some point you might want to do some stock trading, or you might want to invest in mutual funds or do some kind of retirement planning in the country where you live. And that might be France or it might be Taiwan. But the financial institutions in those countries, because of this American law, they will refuse to open the account for you. And this is very discriminatory against American citizens, and all emanates, the cause of this is an American law. So even though you're living in France or Taiwan or anywhere else around the world, this American law has caused a situation where you cannot access most types of financial services in the country where you live outside the United States. Now, John, there's another issue with financial institutions that has a serious effect on American citizens who live overseas. I just talked about opening financial services accounts outside the United States. But we have learned as an organization, because we talk to Americans who live overseas all the time, financial institutions in the United States are also unwilling to open accounts for Americans who live abroad. And why is that, John? You might ask, why wouldn't a bank or a stockbroker in New York open an account for an American who lives in France or Taiwan or South Africa? There's a very simple answer to that, John. And the answer to that is American financial institutions will not accept foreign addresses. So, and the reason for that is their best practices for onboarding new clients, the anti-money laundering due diligence process, requires them to do more due diligence and ask more questions if a potential account holder gives them a foreign address. So basically, if you, John, living in Taiwan, you call up a financial institution in New York or in Florida or California or Texas or anywhere else in the United States, and you say, I want to open a stock trading account, I want to open a mutual fund account, I want to open an IRA, an individual retirement account, and they say, certainly, John, we'd love to open that account for you. What's your address? And you give them an address in Taiwan. That will be the end of the conversation. They will not open that account for you, even though you're an American citizen and you're trying to open an account in the United States. The reason why, as I explained, they won't do that is because their system will flag a foreign address, and they would be required to ask you 50 questions until they get comfortable that you're not a terrorist or you're not a drug dealer, simply because you have a foreign address. And you could have an address that's, 1 Buckingham Palace, and they're still going to do all this due diligence on you. So basically what the American financial institutions decided was, it's not worth all the extra effort to do due diligence on a potential account holder who has a foreign address. The easiest thing to do is simply not open the account for an individual who's providing a foreign address. So again, the result of this situation is if you're an American living abroad, you cannot open a financial services account in the United States because they will not accept a foreign address anymore. And in fact, very often, if they find out you have a foreign address, they will close your account, literally. So, John, let's say you were living in Florida and you had opened a financial services account, you had a stock trading account or an individual retirement account at a financial institution in the United States. Then you move to Taiwan and you get on the phone with the financial institution and with good intentions, John. You tell that financial institution, hi, I'm calling because I want to update my address. I have moved to Taiwan and I want to give you my foreign address. What's going to happen is that financial institution is going to have alarm bells going off because you're giving a foreign address, and they're going to eventually tell you, sir, you have to close your account. We're going to give you 30 days to move the money out of your account, or we're going to forcibly close the account and just liquidate everything you have. You might have stocks that you don't want to sell, but the institution is going to tell you, we're going to sell the stocks, whether you want to or not, and just mail you a check for whatever the proceeds are. Okay, so the moment you told them you have a foreign address, you're out. They're going to kick you out. Okay, they don't want you anymore as a client, but simply because you have a foreign address. And that the end result of all of this is, if you're an American living abroad, you have great difficulty accessing financial services overseas because the institutions don't want to have to report an American citizen account holder information to the United States government. And you cannot access financial services in the United States because financial institutions in the United States will not accept your foreign address. So basically, as an overseas American, part of my language, John, you're screwed. You cannot open a financial services account in the U.S. or overseas. So what do you do? Well, how do you solve this problem? Well, there are some ways to solve this problem, but it ultimately will cause more problems. One way people solve this problem is if they still have a U.S. address. For example, you own property somewhere in the United States, or your parents still live in the house where you grew up, and you continue to use that address on your financial services accounts in the United States. Or you have a sibling or you have a friend who's willing to lend their address in the United States to you, so you could keep on giving the financial institution in the United States a U.S. address. And don't tell them that you moved overseas. The moment you say that, John, they're going to kick you out. They're going to close your account. So you have to give them a U.S. address, and you cannot tell them that you moved overseas. So the problem with that is eventually you might not be able to use that address, right? If you're using your parents' address, well, eventually your parents will pass on. Right. So then you're stuck. You don't have a U.S. address anymore. And if you have no friends, and I don't know if you have friends or not in the United States, John, but if you have no friends who are willing to lend their address to you, then you're stuck. Right? So you're going to be your account's going to be forcibly closed. For overseas, a lot of people, American citizens who are married to a foreign spouse, they might just let the spouse open all the financial services accounts. So everything is in the spouse's name. It's not in your name. And the reason it's not in your name is because the financial institution will not open accounts for American citizens. But what's the problem with that situation, John? You might get divorced and all your assets are in your foreign spouse's name. Right. So you can imagine where this is going, because as we've sometimes received inquiries from people at the Association of American Resident Overseas, we have people call us up and say, I got divorced, everything was in my spouse's name, and now he or she has run off with all of the assets, which really were joint assets, but because the financial institutions won't open accounts for American citizens, we had to put the accounts in my foreign spouse's name. It's only in the spouse's name, and now the spouse won't give me my share back after we got divorced. So it's not a great solution, and I was, as a lawyer myself, someone who's concerned about risk management, it's very risky to put all your own assets 100% in your spouse's name, because you might get divorced. And then good luck trying to get those assets back from your spouse. So the number one issue that we were looking at was this inability to obtain financial services in the countries where we live, overseas, and the concurrent inability to access financial services in the United States, because financial institutions in the U.S. will not accept foreign addresses.
Wow. This is a real nightmare for American citizens overseas.
Yes, it is. And it's all because of a U.S. law, or it's because of due diligence requirements that force U.S. financial institutions to treat foreign addresses as something dangerous.
I would think certain countries that would, like Japan or even England, would be get a different level of approval than, let's say, I don't want to say India, but a country with a higher risk.
Well, the law was not designed that way, right? The law was designed to implement a reporting requirement for accounts that Americans have overseas. In fact, John, the target of this law, when it was originally written, was really people who live in the U.S. but have accounts overseas. That's who the target audience was when Congress wrote this law. The target was not people like you or me who live overseas because they've made the decision for whatever reason to be resident overseas. That group, the latter constituency, people like us, was not the intended target of this law. The intended target was people in the U.S. who had Swiss bank accounts or in other tax haven countries. But the law of unintended consequences meant that people like you or I living overseas, we have to report our foreign accounts. And as I explained, the institution that has American citizens as clients also has to report. So again, the easiest solution for the foreign financial institution was to refuse to take on American citizens as clients. Then they have nothing to report. It was the easy solution. So they refused to take on U.S. citizens as clients. Now, there are some exceptions. For example, again, you could get a basic savings account. Why can you get a basic savings account overseas? Because it doesn't generate any profit. So the law and the American government, they're looking for your stock trading accounts overseas, your mutual fund trading accounts overseas. They're looking for hiding profits, hiding capital gains. They're not looking for savings accounts that don't generate any income. So as an American overseas, you could walk into a bank and get a savings account. You could probably get a credit card as well. But you cannot get accounts that generate income like stock trading, futures trading, mutual funds, retirement planning accounts, things like that. There's typically another exception. If you are a high net worth individual, if you're opening an account with a private bank and you have $5 million in assets that you're going to use to open the account, the institution will take you on because you're going to be a very profitable client as a high net worth individual. So John, I know you're a multimillionaire.
Sure.
So you would have no trouble opening an account because the institution will be willing to go to the trouble of reporting your account to the United States government. It's worth their time.
Sure.
Because you'll be generating a lot of profit for the institution. As a high net worth individual, you're going to be doing a lot of stock trading, buying a lot of different products, financial products, et cetera. So you're a worthwhile client. But the middle class, the average American overseas is not, again, it's not worth their time to take on that person as a client. But that person does need financial services as well. But again, there is an exception typically for high net worth individuals.
Well, that explains a lot because I have a U.S. checking account I've had for 40 years, maybe in the U.S. And I think roughly about 10 years ago, I couldn't use my ATM card from the U.S.
Did they decide that you're a terrorist because
did you
give them a foreign address?
Yeah, I had a foreign address, actually.
Yeah, well, that's why they don't want you as clients anymore.
And I said, well, I have a record here. You should be able to pull up all my bank records to see that. And I was only recently able to get it moved back to my U.S. address through a relative. So now it works.
Yeah, because you basically gave them a fiction, right? They think you live at that address.
Well, it's not fiction.
You don't live there, though. You live here in Taiwan.
When I'm there on a visit.
But as I explained earlier, a lot of people have to do that. You have to give an address for a friend or a relative.
I don't, I don't make enough to be, like you say, a target or a red flag. But I can see why, for at least 8 years, I couldn't use my ATM card until recently. It would just drive me crazy. So it turns out that they changed some rules or something, and I didn't.
Well, it's because you gave them the U.S. address, then you were okay.
Well, my driver's license was always the same.
Yeah, but if you told them you had a foreign address, it would raise the red flags on your account.
Yeah, perhaps it did.
So my best advice to Americans who are listening to the show is if you have an account, a legacy account in the United States that was open before you moved overseas, and you can continue to use that address for whatever reason, don't mention to the bank anytime you're on the phone with them that you moved overseas because they will red flag your account and close the account.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and mine is a small one, one of those brick and mortar small ones, but it's owned by a larger corporation.
That wasn't the only issue we were talking about, but that was the main issue of concern for expatriates is this inability to access financial services. So we brought that up in all our meetings with congressional staff, with the IRS as well. But is it going to be changed anytime soon? Not likely. This is not a major issue for members of Congress. Again, expatriates are dispersed among all 50 states, so we don't have voting power in any particular state that would prompt a member of the House or Senate to actually do something. We have been asking members of Congress to pass something which we call the same country exception. What does that mean? That would mean that in the country where you live, there'd be no reporting requirement. So, John, you live in Taiwan. You have a residency card for Taiwan. You're a legitimate resident here in Taiwan. You're not living in the shadows. You're not a tourist. You legitimately live here. You have a residency card. The proposal is that your accounts in the country where you have residency would not have to be reported to the U.S. government. So this way, the financial institutions, in your case in Taiwan, they would be willing to open stock trading account for you because they would no longer have a reporting requirement because it's the country where you live. That's the proposal as a solution. So for your Swiss bank accounts or your Cayman bank accounts, those are not countries or jurisdictions where you live. So those would still be required to report to the U.S. government because you don't live in those places. But the accounts you have in Taiwan would not be reportable to the U.S. government, and thus the institutions would be comfortable opening the account for you. That's the theory, and that's the proposal we have made to Congress. And hopefully next year, when there's a new Congress, a helpful congressman will stick it into some mammoth bill that has to do with tax and unrelated issues, because this is the kind of specific issue that someone needs to slip in to the bill, and it's not going to get a lot of debate or discussion because it's a very esoteric kind of issue, but we're hoping a friendly member of Congress will stick it into the next big tax bill. And there will be a big tax bill next year because a lot of the tax changes that were passed in the 2017 tax bill that at the end of the first year of the Trump administration, when Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, a lot of those provisions expire in 2025. So Congress needs to pass another law to extend them. So there will be a big tax legislation in 2025. And again, we're hoping someone in Congress will insert our same country exception proposal into the tax bill.
Wow. I hope you're being well paid for your efforts.
Nope, strictly volunteer. I do this as a labor of love and to help the expatriate community.
So this organization is quite amazing. How long has it been around?
We just celebrated our 50th anniversary.
Wow.
And that's a good time to mention what were our original issues and the reason why the organization was formed 50 years ago. At the time, there were a lot more complexities with passing on citizenship when children are born overseas to American citizens. So 50 years ago, that was a lot more complex. The situation made it difficult in some cases to pass along U.S. citizenship at the time. And the other issue back then was absentee voting, or the ease, I should say, or the lack of ease of absentee voting. Now, both of those issues, transmitting U.S. citizenship to a child born overseas, as well as absentee voting for an American who lives overseas, in many ways, those two issues have been resolved. So it's much more straightforward nowadays to transmit your citizenship. For example, John, if you have kids who were born here in Taiwan, it's a lot easier now to transmit U.S. citizenship to them if you choose to do so. And it's a lot easier to get an absentee ballot for your home state, wherever that is, than it was 50 or 60 years ago. So that's why over time, the focus of our organization has shifted to some other issues, such as the financial account issues that I talked about. However, in the absentee voting space, there is a peculiar issue. There are 12 states, as far as we know, 12 out of 50 states, that will not allow children born overseas, once they reach adulthood, to vote by absentee ballot. Now, the other 38 states, they will allow that person who was born overseas and never lived in the United States to vote by absentee ballot if they can demonstrate that they're going to return to the United States. They may even have a U.S. home address. Maybe their parents still own property in the United States, for example. Maybe you went there every summer, for example. So you still have connections to a specific state, even though you've predominantly lived overseas. So 38 states will allow people born overseas who had American citizenship via their parents to vote by absentee ballot. 38 states will do that. But there are 12 states that would say, nope, we do not allow someone who was born overseas and has never lived in our state to vote by absentee ballot. Fortunately, those are only 12 states. Unfortunately, it's going to be difficult to get those 12 states to change their laws. The other 38 states changed their laws. They do recognize the right to vote of somebody who was born overseas to parents who came from that state. But there are 12 states that won't change their laws as of now. And it would especially in the current environment where, frankly, one party, the Republicans, is raising a lot of concerns about early voting, voting by mail, absentee ballot voting for people from overseas. I think it's going to be very difficult to get those 12 states to convince the state legislators to change their absentee voting eligibility laws.
Oh, wow. So that's a challenge. What
Yes.
else? What was like the secondary items of interest?
Well, we met with the State Department Bureau of Consular Services, and we talked a little bit about evacuations.
Oh, wow.
Yes, in situations like pandemics, so COVID, or in situations like war, like Afghanistan.
Right.
And generally the United States government, and I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just going to state what the approach is. Generally, the United States government does not offer evacuation services. Mm-hmm. So their starting point in these kinds of situations is not to charter a plane and send it in to get American citizens out of a certain country. However, due to the severity of a situation or the complexities, the lack of commercial aircraft, for example, public pressure, there's been a number of situations where the United States government, they will charter aircraft to and make it available to U.S. citizens. The same thing happened in Israel last October when Hamas attacked Israel, and there were United States citizens who were desperate to leave Israel. There were not enough commercial flights or there were no commercial flights.
Right.
So then there's public pressure. Say, United States government, you should do something. Again, it's not the starting point of the United States government that they're going to immediately provide that kind of evacuation service to U.S. citizens who are in that country when some kind of situation arises. But there have been a number of situations where the U.S. government does provide they do provide chartered aircraft for American citizens to leave those countries where there's some kind of emergency situation. It is not free. Okay, so I want to emphasize to people listening to the program, if the United States government does charter aircraft to evacuate U.S. citizens, they are not providing that service for free. You do have to sign an IOU.
Oh, wow. How much is that going to be?
Well, the fee is going to vary from situation to situation.
But it's not going to be a commercial rate.
It's going to be more than that, of course. Yeah, it could be thousands of dollars. So if you were in Afghanistan and the U.S. government sent in a chartered flight, they're going to tell you, like, yes, there is a seat on the charter flight. It's going to cost X dollars. And if you want to go on that flight, you have to sign an IOU to the United States government. And they might come after you for the money. They're not going to let you get away without paying. Again, the approach is not to do this for free for American citizens. Now, some people might criticize that, and they might say, well, the U.S. government should provide free evacuations. But again, generally, that's not the approach of the United States government. You have to sign an IOU, and they will come after you for the money to the best of their ability. Now, if you return to living overseas, for example, if you took a charter flight out of Israel on October 8th or 9th or 10th, right after the war with Hamas began, and then you subsequently returned to Israel because you decided it was safe to live there, it might be difficult for the United States government to come after you. So then we're relying on your conscience to repay the United States government, or the United States government might offer a discount. They might say, we're not going to charge you the full dollar amount that's in the IOU. We'll settle with you for a lower amount. There have been situations where the United States government has done that as well. But it is not free. It's not free to get an evacuation aircraft or a seat on an evacuation aircraft provided by the United States government. So keep that in mind, especially if you live in Taiwan and a war occurs with China.
You got to be a little careful there. Yeah, we don't think there's going to be anything terrible. But I was told that a lot of times they take your passport when you arrive in the United States.
I'm not off the top of my head aware of that. I just know about the IOU, that they'll make you sign an IOU.
Yeah, when we think of military evacuations, we often think of Saigon, 1975, which was a big mess.
Yeah, but there's a lot of misunderstanding. Again, because of that situation, a lot of people assume that, again, as I explained, whether or not it's a pandemic situation like COVID or it's a war situation like Israel or Afghanistan. 10 years ago, there was Yemen. There are a number of situations where this arose, and people mistakenly assume that the United States government provides this service and provides it for free. And that's simply not the case.
And you argue it should be free.
That's not my position. It's not up to me. It's up to Uncle Sam.
Hey, Ross, thanks for joining us. Okay?
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Hey, I hope you come back.
Thank you.
Cheers.